I'm Jessica Romano with Carnegie Museum of Natural History. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Carla Rosenfeld, Assistant Curator of Earth Sciences. Carla, you have an interesting field of study that most people might not have heard of. It's called biogeochemistry. Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, it's actually relatively newly, at least named as a discipline, and it's really a kind of cool interdisciplinary study where you're considering all different aspects of even physical, biological, chemical, and geological processes in the environment. So it's kind of a fancy way to say environmental science in reality. And so often those of us who study biogeochemistry are really interested in sort of how processes go on and what happens in the natural environment in terms of how living organisms interact with non-living things like rocks or minerals. And it's a lot of consideration of specific elemental cycles. So ones that we think of might be like carbon or nitrogen, where they cycle through and they are present in all different aspects of this, right? They're in the marine systems, they're in rocks that underlie those marine systems, they're in rocks that underlie the continental systems, but it's also present as carbon dioxide in the air. Plants fix that carbon dioxide and take it up and then bring it down and translocate it into the soils. And so that's one example of carbon, but all different elements have cycles that go through both biological components and abiotic. And that's really what I'm interested in, is understanding that the cycling of those elements and both living and non-living components to it.
So tell me a little bit about your field work and types of sites that you would maybe go to do your research.
Yeah, one of the things that's really cool about my fieldwork is that I get to go to all sorts of different places. Most of my work has been in the US, but all over. So I've been down to the deepest underground mine in Minnesota, the Sudan underground mine. And I've also been at the top of mountains in Southeast Idaho, which is also the home of a number of hot spring environments as well. So that's a really fun and cool environment to go to. I've done work here in Pennsylvania at acid mine drainage sites. So these are abandoned coal mines usually. Some of them are well reclaimed. So they look just like a natural environment. They have a forest on top of them. You can't even really tell that mining happened. Some of them are a little bit more disturbed. So you might know when you walk on there that something was going on, whether or not you know that it was mining. But maybe the plant community is very different than the normal plant community of a forest and that kind of thing. So one of the cool things that I do is I try to think about environmental processes, and when I go out to do field work, I'm not just characterizing the site, but I might actually be setting up a whole experiment out there. And so we're gonna go out and we're gonna maybe manipulate the whole environment within this location so that we can understand the impacts of those manipulations in a more natural system. So that's really informative, and then we can take that and compare it to things that we do maybe in the lab that are a little bit more controlled. We have less variables, we have less complexity, right? Because we don't have, all of the changing precipitation and changing weather and complexity of a soil or things like that. But it's a little less realistic, right? Because in the lab, we have a very controlled environment. We might be taking one particular organism and interacting it with one mineral, and that's very rarely found in the environment. But we can use those as sort of bookends, right? We can use the complex natural environment experiments and the lab experiments to try and get a better understanding of what's going on.
So what type of tools would you be using in your lab and in the field?
So actually, I'm kind of a tool nerd because my background is that I started as a chemistry major in undergrad before I got into the more environmental aspects of of environmental science and biogeochemistry. So I really love different analytical techniques, and we use a lot of different things in my type of research. So I'll use tools that mineralogists use, like an X-ray diffraction or X-ray diffractometer, where we're trying to actually drill down into specific minerals to see atom placement and how different atoms are arranged within a whole mineral structure. And I'll do that. I use electron microscopy. So these are using electron beams, and we actually get really nice, really, really small scale images down to, like nanometer scale. So we're talking about like hundreds of thousands of times smaller than the width of a human hair.
Wow.
That means that we can image things like microbes, which we can't see with our naked eye. We need microscopes to look at them. And because I study a lot of how microbes interact with minerals, I can actually image both of those things together with those kinds of microscopes. I just love analytical equipment. I just want to know all the different ways that I could measure different things. I want to use them all. I want to know how they work.
Can you give me some idea of a practical implication of the work that you do?
A lot of my work is very deeply rooted in sort of the practicality of understanding the world around us, but also understanding how humans interact with the environment. And particularly, I've studied a lot about how we might clean up or deal with maybe legacy pollution impacts that humans have had on the. There might have been landfill dumping in an area that wasn't prepared to be a landfill in some way. And so now there's a lot of, leaching or just different chemicals and different pollutants moving around outside of that landfill. But it could also be, that there was mining in this environment, and the way we treated the mine and the land underneath the mine, it exposed, different rocks that are now on the surface of the earth, and they were not formed on the surface of the earth, and they're not stable on the surface of the earth. And so when they're there and they're interacting with the air and water that's coming down now, they might, dissolve and release a lot of compounds or elements, pollutants that we don't necessarily want in our ecosystems. And so I worked in grad school on cadmium and zinc and how that moved through the environment, and mostly thinking about it coming from smelting. And so we were actually mining rocks, and then, the resulting impact was that cadmium and zinc moved through the environment on the surface in a way that it wouldn't normally. And then with selenium, the selenium is naturally there in the soils, but then there are different human activities. Out west, it happens because of irrigation, actually, agricultural irrigation. It moves the selenium and actually leaches it through the soil, and you end up getting accumulations of those elements, which can have really negative ecological consequences in certain areas. How do we maybe mitigate those negative impacts? That's a lot of what I think about with those kinds of elements. Making things less toxic, more benign.
Well, thank you so much, Carla. That all sounds really interesting, and I'm excited to see where your research takes you.
Thank you very much.